But as we move forward, I would like to call the Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of Zululand to do us the honor of blessing this occasion with always interesting introductory remarks. And after that, then I'll introduce the speaker, and I'm sure the Vice Chancellor will want to say a word or so about our visitor before I formally welcome him. Without much ado, may I call Professor Mtose to do us the honor.
Molweni.
Molweni.
Sanibonani. And Molweni. To the University of Zululand Chairperson of Council, Ms. Annie Baluza, and all members of University Council online, executive members, with special appreciation for my brand new DVC, Institutional Support, Professor Chaita, Professor Siepe, who's the chair of this session. Thank you very much, sir. Management committee members, staff and students of the University of Zululand. Most importantly, our guest speaker for today's webinar, Professor Tendai Sithole. I will not do what Prof. Siepe has asked me to do, say more about him. He is here to deliver. At the end of this, there's going to be a test for each one of you to define him and say who is Tendai Sithole. That is not done by me. I greet you all and thank you for joining this webinar. The title of today's webinar is The Texture of Because Being, as portrayed by Maboho P. More, and the Native Club. And this is our fourth webinar in this September of 2023. We call these Vice Chancellor webinars, but these are lectures to stimulate the intellectual and academic being of this university. I welcome you today, still fresh from the intellectual revival in Vuselele that we had here, experienced by those of us who were privileged to participate in an intensive 4-day workshop on the coloniality of knowledge, facilitated by the global decolonial luminary, Ndlovu Kacheni. At that remarkable encounter, Ndlovu Kacheni reminded us that the struggle, the pursuit of African thought that UniZulu has embarked on is at its core extension, and that shall return. Then I will return to this point later. We're taken on a grand epistemic tour in which we were prompted to rethink and think our practices as academics. Some 4 weeks later, here we are, poised to participate in yet another dose of deep engagement. This time, the spotlight is on how to confront the question of dominant systems of thought that continue to lurk in our consciousness. In this connection, we learn from Agenda 2022 that time has come for Africans to develop conceptual schemes that can be owned by Africans and which can help constitute the emergence of African philosophy. Aganda explains that in seeking to achieve this, there is a need to grapple with, open quote, two titanic and interrelated struggles simultaneously. The first struggle is the struggle of universal reason, domesticated in Africa to produce original philosophical concepts that are traceable to Africa, conceived both as a physical geographical space and in the epistemic domain of thought determined by distinctiveness, wide views, of Black Africans. The second is a struggle to shake off the pervasive and dominating influence of Western intellectual culture in African life, a struggle often expressed in the project called decolonization, close quote. The twin task has been characterized as the universalism, particularism conundrum. It is a phenomenon which encapsulates Tota's intellectual journey in which African scholars have a plot, a route towards the production of authentic African thought systems. Program Director, allow me now to share with you a glimpse of the intricate maze of contestations that have come to characterize the conundrum over the years. We can reflect on these as we participate in today's engagement. Navigating the universalism particularism perspective. In recent months, we have been marching resolutely in search for an authentic African thought identity. The complexity of our mission continues to unravel. In the process, we have stumbled upon two overarching orientations in the development of thought systems, namely universalism and particularism. These terms are pregnant, not me this time, with deep philosophical controversies that I cannot go into fully or do justice to them, given the limited time. I will simply highlight some key questions that should help us spot some contours of the raging debate. The question of universalism. Regarding to this question, I cast my eyes on what I call the European/colonial versus universalism, and juxtapose that with what I call inclusive universalism. In terms of European colonial universalism, I pick on the example of one prominent born contention that can be traced back to the period in Europe called the Enlightenment of the Age of Reason. Thinkers of that epoch, who become synonymous of Western philosophical tradition, placed a lot of value on reason as a basis for global epistemic authority. They postulated that those who are lacking in reason and rationality, meaning Black, meaning Africans, are not capable of producing philosophy or thought system. More, 1996, captures the European Enlightenment thinkers' argument when he summarizes their logic, which puts the idea that, open quote, Africans lack rationality. Therefore, Africans are not human beings. Since they are not human beings, then they cannot produce the most rational activity, philosophy. Therefore, there is no African philosophy, end quote. Two things are clear from this quotation. The rationalized nature of the Western thinkers and the conconement of dehumanizing the conception of African as a non-thinker. In so doing, they universalized Western thought systems as authentic and universally applicable. This was done at the expense of African thought systems. For example, in the form of African proverbs, wise saying, riddles, etc. They were relegated as traditional thinking, conjuring pejorative images such as low intellect and naivete, among others. Such an attitude was scoffed by Hoffman and Meslin, 2021, who blatantly stated that the proclaimed European universalism has indeed not been universal, but followed rather the European temptation to universalize its own beliefs norms, and interest. In other words, what Europeans claimed to be universal, affecting the lived experiences of the colonized, was real insofar as it was a manifestation of colonial power dynamics. Clearly, therefore, this is a type of universalism that is inward-looking and which has far-reaching consequences for the development of African thought systems. By contrast, what I call inclusive universalism is more accommodative. In terms of inclusive universalism, colonizer scholars Gatsheni Ndlovu, 2007, and More, 1916, have exposed many fallacies associated with European colonial universalism, which have been well documented. To cite just one example, contrary to those who believe reason was the quality of white Europeans, it has been shown that reason is in fact a universal human capability. This alone, therefore, means that there is no justifiable grounds for the marginalization and or rejection of African thought systems on the basis of lack of inferior reason. In consonance with the universality of reason, Chimakonam has called for the need to be clear about the context in which thought systems are developed, arguing that the basic denominator of thought in any context is reason. To illustrate the point, it deploys the concept of place and space to illustrate a form of universalism that should be useful to African thinkers, arguing that, a quote, philosophical place could be likened to various philosophical traditions or cultures, such as African, Western, or Eastern philosophies, in which reason contends with a contingent, but not arbitrary to the questions that arise in a given culture. Philosophical space is an intercultural forum in which various philosophical traditions converge to converse amongst themselves. Such universalism allows African thought systems to emerge, reaching out and dialogue with what he called universal philosophical space in the mode of the global expansion of thought for the benefit of all humankind. Such universalism for Chikamanon allows for African thought systems to emerge, reaching out the dialogue with what he called the universal philosophical space in the mode of global expansion of thought for the benefit of all humankind. I repeat this because this actually argues against the other ways of thinking about, like Masocha once read a paper that says, who thinks? Did he say that? Who's got a right to think? Yeah, and that is a paper he read for us, which then reminded me in thinking for Professor Stolle to say, actually we need, and what Ndlovu Gatsheni has said to us, we need to claim that very space and say, this space is actually inclusive and is universal. It doesn't belong to any race, to anyone, it belongs to all of us, those that can think. So I think Masocha today is answered as to who thinks, who's got a right to think, we all. The particularism question, regarding particularism, what must be borne in mind is that thought systems can be counted as universal, would have originated in a particular place in Africa or Europe. Thus, it can be said that universal is dependent on a particular. To further demonstrate where particularism comes into the equation, More has argued that even European universalism is particularized universalism, that one that excludes Blacks from the category of human beings, core rational beings. In other words, while particularism may be exclusionary, it have universalizing consequences. This seems or seemingly is a double-edged nature of particularism, can be found in the work of South African thinkers of the 20th and 21st centuries. To elaborate on this point, I use two forms of particularism, which are Black consciousness and nativism. Don't worry, Professor Story, I'm not going to get your paper, I'm not saying it. Just me prophesying on what you're going to say. Black consciousness, as we all know, Black consciousness thought in South Africa is accredited to the legacy of anti-apartheid stalwart Steve Bantu Biko. Biko's ideas have generated and continue to generate debate among scholars and activists alike. Despite the potency of Biko's thought, there are those who have scoffed at the construct Black consciousness as racist and an example of racial particularism that poses a danger to build a solidarity that can fight racial divisions and oppression. That's what Baron, not you, Byron, said 2020. To counter this perception of Biko's thought, Hall 2017 pointed out that for Black consciousness thinkers, the category Black was not used in reference to biological reality, but social reality. In other words, it did not denote a racial group, but a racialized group, Hall writes, a quote, rather than race-specific school of thought, Black consciousness was a school of thought which focused on specific problems to a racialized group in Southern Africa, in South African context, advocated temporarily exclusion of white people from Black South Africans, liberation movement in order to aid the conscientization process necessary for overcoming injustice. The argument here is that a strong collective identity of Black on the part of victimized racialized group could contribute to group solidarity that can be deployed to wage a successful struggle against racial injustice. More explains that Steve Biko inspired Black consciousness movement, open quote, operated as a midwife in the process of bringing to life the problem of Black being. For this reason, Black consciousness is a philosophy born of struggle and a movement animated by what Bill Posata characterizes as a needing to be. Thus, it can be seen that because Black consciousness thought brought into sharp focus the need to bring about radical break with historical dehumanizing Black existence under apartheid. While the foregoing points may appear to temper the objections against invoking particularly Black identity for mobilizing purposes, skeptics remain convinced that a more sustainable way would be to move beyond such particularism towards embracing universalism that can foster cross-racial solidarity of the oppressed. Others will bring in the notion of social class, which cuts across racial classification. In terms of nativism, another form of particularism that has been suspected to have racial overtones is what scholars More Gajanitov refer to as nativism. In South Africa, the term has been associated with a call by Mandela and Mbeki for the formation of a native club of Black think tank that will bring together African intellectuals. And I think we are on that journey here. The two leaders were looking for thinkers who would sever the shackles of intellectual servitude and work towards becoming masters and architects of their own destiny. There are many theories and conceptions of nativism that I shall not go into. Instead, I focus on its purpose, which appears to align with the proponents of the Native Club in giving prominence to the role of native intellectuals. Gachoni Ndlovu writes, open quote, colonialism is not yet a legacy, and the colonial struggle must be taken to the realm of ideas, particularly grappling with the epistemological dominance of post-Enlightenment Western knowledge. Africa intellectuals or native intellectuals should take their rightful place as producers of knowledge, usable and relevant to Africa, close quote. Building upon this understanding, African thinkers are asked to emerge from epistemic bondage and contribute to what Chimakon Nam calls global expansion of thought. Critics of nativism, however, have warned that nativism can lead to anti-universalistic stance that can be counterproductive. One reason that this is stated by More is that the choice of what the critics call a racially inflected term, native, and its connotation of binary exclusionary practices of indigeneity, foreigner, native, settler, gives rise to skepticism. Ndlovu in 2013 has highlighted another source of cynicism, while acknowledging that a strong collective of racialized Black identity can be deployed to wage the struggle against racial injustice. The nativism, which was promoted through African nationalism of the 50s and the 60s, in principle sought to represent what was considered authentic national substance, and it inevitably proceeded through exclusion of those considered outsiders, promoting nativism, xenophobia, and other phobias. Ndlovu sees these characteristics as degeneration of nationalism. Drawing on this expose of the dark side of nativism, we can pose a question. What capacities are needed for African intellectuals to navigate their way around extreme particularistic versions of African thought, whose universal applicability and epistemic relevance to humanity would be in doubt? Beyond the palatable and unpalatable understandings of nativism, a number of scholars have warned against being locked in their universalism or particularism camps. Instead, they've called for transcendence of the conundrum. One strong prominent of this position, Akanda, has advocated that the radical transcending of great divide, universalism versus particularism, is in the manner that retains the best aspirations of both schools of thought while moving forward with the business of formulating concepts in the context of systems building. For Agada, Africa has reached a phase of the production of thought systems comparable to what West went through. How then do we transcend the conundrum of free ourselves from the shackles of the snare of colonial metrics of power? Transcending the conundrum. Program director, I'm mindful of the fact that the panoramic tour of contestations regarding universalistic and particular schools of thought that I've shared thus far may be somewhat overwhelming. But I'm deliberate today because that is when the attorney left us debating and deliberating on this conundrum. And the question that is easy is not easy. The question is difficult. The answer is easy as long as we mesh and immerse ourselves within these debates with fully understanding what we mean by each and each term we are using in this seeking the truth and seeking a node for African thought. It is easy to get lost in this maze and be persuaded to avoid moving out of our comfort zones and maintain a false sense of safety. I've said this so much in our meeting last week of Mango, that it would be easy for us to pretend to understand and easy for us to run away from grappling with the real issues and say when we don't understand and say, what, Sitol, we don't understand what you mean by this. But instead of the pretense, I want to argue this morning that we make ourselves naked in terms of declaring what is it that we understand, what is it that we don't understand, so that we learn more. And that's where Gajanindov left us, which is why I'm taking time in looking at how do we transcend from this conundrum that we find ourselves in. How do we understand that we're going to be criticized by various people and we're going to be criticized from all angles, but we need to stand with understanding of the knowledge that people like Stone are coming to plant in our midst. Otherwise, if we don't, we'll be lost forever and we lose the generations of this university. Where was I before I started preaching? I was saying that it's easy to get lost in the maze and be persuaded to avoid moving out of our own comfort zones and maintain a false sense of safety. This doesn't mean that. We need to be vulnerable enough so that we can learn more. That being the case, you'll be glad to hear that there could be a silver lining. While we have seen the divergence of thought perspective on many fundamental aspects, producing a seemingly insurmountable conundrum, we can at the same time detect some convergence that point to ways of transcending the structures of the philosophical orientations. As an example, we can utilize two overlapping rallying points where there is a broad engagement. The first is that African thinkers cannot afford to acquiesce the continued global dominance of Western thought systems. We can't afford that. This speaks to the survival and existence of Africans as humans. The second point is that the time has come to confront existential challenges caused by colonialism by waging an epistemic offensive. Given the opportunity presented by the two areas of census, it should be possible to imagine what the path of transcendence would look like. By extracting two thematic divisions arising from the areas of broad agreement, the picture can begin to appear. The two themes being reasserting Black African humanity and tackling epistemic challenges. In terms of, I'm about to finish, but I hope you're learning. In terms of reasserting Black African humanity, we have seen how the South African, the Steve Biko-led Black consciousness movement concerned itself with the actual existence in particular, and the quest for Black humanity in the context of apartheid racism, which forced Black person to internalize its Black being as a non-being. Such dehumanization was premised on the degree of humanity attributed to the identities in question. The lighter the one skin is, the closer to full humanity one, and vice versa. Faced by such violence, transcending the identity of non-being, it is argued, will have to be done by every people who have lost their humanity by reasserting their intellectual progress and reason, previously denied by Enlightenment colonizers, to produce African thought systems. The fact of the matter is that Black humanity should not be in question, as More 2012 reminds us that the act of dehumanization is a paradoxical because to dehumanize someone involves first recognizing his or her humanity in order to be able to dehumanize. So you were not dehumanized because you were not humans. It was a realization that you are humans in the first instance. So you needed to be dehumanized so that you feel inferior. With this understanding, Black humanity can be reasserted. Tackling epistemic challenges. To confront existential challenges inflicted by epistemic domination, the site of struggle has been articulated by Ndlovu Gatsheni 2018. In this regard, let me share some of his profound and thought-provoking ideas that can be used to transcend our entrappment in the epistemic colonialities embedded in the universalism, particularism formulations. You can ponder on the following. One, this is what Gatsheni Ndlovu says. Thinking from where we are located, that is, accepting Africa as a legitimate epistemic center from which we make sense of the world. Number two, rethinking. Thinking itself enables us to delve deeper into the very constitutive formulation of modern disciplines, as to assess whether they are still fit for the purpose and to confront directly the very idea of history and philosophy of history, which still fails to disconnect itself from illusion of Europe as the center of the world. We can even unthink the order of knowledge. The third point Gatsheni Ndlovu raises in this epistemic challenge is that learning to unlearn in order to relearn, to break free from thinking programs imposed on us by education, culture, and social environment, always marked by Western imperialism. This also means repurposing of our education. Those who participated in those of us who participated in a 4-day intensive workshop, which Gatsheni Ndlovu would have been exposed to these ideas. To me, they are critical reference points that are part of an emerging framework for waging our struggle. Remember that when Gatsheni Ndlovu was here, what we were thinking of was a framework itself. It was a framework, it was a policy. And when I was preparing for this, all I could think about was all these points that Gatsheni Ndlovu raised here in terms of how do we then take the Node for African thought forward, where actually for me, were the basis or reference points that we should use as part of our emerging framework for waging war against the struggle that we find ourselves in. Program Director, it is my firm belief that the transcendence discourses I have alluded to represent a source of strength and glimmer of hope, and that a just global order is attainable. In conclusion, I'm excited that today's topic, the texture of Biko's being, Bohopi and the Native Club, will take us into another notch of deep thinking about our essence. As we engage and continue our protracted journey of departure from dominant paradigms produced by the intellectuals in the global metropole, we are reclaiming our being as a people. From the ideas I've highlighted, it can be said that one of the suspended points at the heart of my welcome is that developing African thought systems that can go beyond and build upon the universalism, particularism puzzle is not only in vain, it is existential significance to all of us. Once again, a warm welcome and look forward to intellectual nourishment. I thank you very much.
The Vice Chancellor, Professor Mtose, thank you very much for taking us through another form of intellectual revival and for carrying through that spirit that you planted when we had a conference on the notes for African thought. But there's something very significant about what the Vice Chancellor has actually shown is what it means to lead by example, but also what it means to invest a lot of energy in thinking things through. It is not a situation of simply coming to a lecture and say, she has spoken or he has spoken. It's to say, what does this mean for the institution? What does this mean for the curriculum? And it is almost a policy directive to the deputy vice chancellors, to the deans, to the HODs, to the academics, that this is not, as you put it, the universities are also a site of struggle and a site that we need to defeat in terms of making sure that we come from what she calls epistemic bondage. And if we do not do that, then we would actually be failing in this project. And she talked big words, universalism, particularism, but then also the contradictions around those and the debates and the contours of those debates, which if you're going to engage in the struggle, it's about having the skills, having the tools, having the weapons to be able to engage those who will be the naysayers. And you correctly correct to simply, or put differently, I do like the grand tour, the panoramic description of what the debates are, because when you enter in the debate, it must be very clear that you know what you're talking about. It is not about slogans. It is not about embracing the language without understanding the language, because it's so easy to embrace language without even understanding it and continue to remain confused and claim that I know what you're talking about when you actually are displaying lack of knowledge. So I want to thank you for the investment in preparation. But I also think this must be seen as a policy directive to say, if the Vice Chancellor can find time to say, what does this mean? Because ultimately, any discussion around transformation must actually express itself in the transformation of the curriculum. Otherwise, if it doesn't change what we do, then we're wasting time and you're wasting everybody's time and the resources. And of course, now that brings me to the next speaker. But before I invite him, I just want to, as a way of picking up where the VC has left, is to remind ourselves of the words by Edward Said, the Palestinian scholar, who says there has been no major revolution in modern history without intellectuals. Conversely, there's been no major counter-revolutionary movement without intellectuals. Intellectuals have been the fathers and mothers of movements, and of course, sons and daughters, even nephews and nieces. But what is important with what the Vice Chancellor was saying, and I would like to bring Freire here, it's about when Freire talks about making the intellectual more pedagogical and also the intellectual more political, what the Vice Chancellor was saying is to make the intellectual more pedagogical and the pedagogical more intellectual, in a sense that we must actually reflect on what we do. I have the pleasure of calling somebody who it's also difficult for me to talk about him because it is a person who has made it his business to study me. In his master's degree, he decided to say he's going to study my work. But what he was doing is to, as he will claim and explain, is that he's ready to give concrete expression to what he is called shifting the geography of reason. Yeah. Because for too long, rationality has always been seen as Western. Yeah. But by beginning to see our location and our thinkers and our knowledge that they produce. She is she was pointing out to that, and he has done that. And the question that he always asked is, what are we reading? Yeah. And what are we writing? And it's really, how do we approach Black thought? Yeah. Or works written by African people? And also the importance of approaching the writings of Africans with a certain degree of humility. And I'm doing this more to be provocative, because one of these businesses has always been to come up with what that writing mean, and what he calls the archives, the African register and the Black register. And he talks about 4 elements of it, and he'll probably touch on that. But really simply to say, this is a project that VC, you have embraced, and this is the only institution that has expressed itself at the institutional level. And that in itself is a commitment. And Professor Stolle talks about this commitment as also a political commitment. It's writing as a mode of resistance, and not simply writing for the writing's sake, but the real truth and the expression of what we are about is when what we teach in the classroom is linked to what we think and what we write. So the works that we have done, we produce here, should ultimately find themselves expressed in the curriculum. Now, Professor Stolle, who is a colonial scholar, is a professor in the Department of Political Science at the University of South Africa. He's also a research associate at the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation at the University of Johannesburg. And he has written, among others, books like Reconfiguring in Black, The Letter of Black Radical Thought, Maboho Primore, Philosophical Anthropology in Tanzania, the Black Register, Steve Biko. And these are step works that we should have and we must read. If we don't do that, then all these efforts are in vain. Without much ado, may I call Professor Tendai Sithole.
Thank you, Professor Sepe, for this generous introduction. And thank you, Madam Vice Chancellor, Professor Mtose, for clearing a path for me. And maybe I can say on the lighter note that we are done, we can adjourn and then just go straight to the Q&A session. Yeah, but thank you so much. On a serious note, Madam Vice Chancellor, for that. And I must extend my vote of thanks to your Vice Chancellor's team, all the different teams and the itinerary teams, Mr. Registrar, all the academic community, fellow students, and also fellow attendees, both present and virtual, and even those in absentia, they are marked as present. And I must thank Madam Mankai for grounding me and making sure that everything is possible for me to get here. And also I must express my heartfelt gratitude for my new friends that I found, which I learned this morning, that they are father and son. The drivers by the names of Mr. and Mr. Mkwanazi, who are taking care of me. Colleagues, good morning, and all protocol observed. I would like to dedicate this lecture, The Texture of Biko's Being, which I will change a subtitle just a bit to be on Maboho Pimore's philosophical defense of the native club. And I am presenting it in memory of the recently departed Professor Homotso Michael Masemot, who was a fellow traveler and also an agent provocateur that we spent many moments engaging in intellectual thought. And I must begin to say that what I am presenting with you, it's a scattered version of the project that I've decided to develop in form of a book. And I must declare that it's a complaint. And I'm filing this complaint not to be eligible to what I would call the white Congress and its liberal consensus. But I'm filing this complaint against the very essence of the politics of memory, since like in this country that is plagued by a pandemic that I will call political amnesia, that we seem to forget that in the next 3 years, we will be marking the 20 years of the death of the Native Club, which was killed on the day of its inauguration. And I am doing this through the texture of Steve Biko's being, but I'm not doing it in this, what I would call the orgy of Biko, which happens in September, which itself perpetuates this very idea of forgetting that, oh, the Biko of September, you will see all the columns and then radio stations and so forth. So I am against the Biko of the event, and I am for the Biko who lives, the Biko of the everyday. And it is in this texture of Biko's being that I am putting before you a philosopher who has been thinking from the Black point of view, unapologetically so, Maboho Percy More. And I am locating his philosophical critique, which exposes the racist infrastructure that does not allow Blacks to be on their own. Yeah. And for us to understand this infrastructure of racism in this polity called South Africa, which is just a country without a name, but a geographic reference, that we should understand his critique as the critique of a scandal. So I have a complaint. My complaint is to the fellow Black epistemic community, of course, outside the bounds of the institutions of higher learning. And I want us to pay fidelity to memory. If we pay fidelity to memory, we will refuse to mark the historical scandal of our dehumanization from what has been referred to apartheid, which was having a short history because apartheid happened in just mere 40 years, 42 years or so. And I want us to understand the racist infrastructure that underlies South Africa and to call South Africa a racist, settler, colonialist, segregationist, apartheid, constitutional apparatus. We must understand South Africa in that sense. And I am proposing, in thinking with Maboho More on the very idea of Azania. Yeah. And it should not be the issue of changing the name of the country if we don't exercise this racist, settler, colonialist, segregationist, apartheid, constitutionalist apparatus. So in declaring Azania, we will need a country that is going to restore the long history of dispossession that has been marked from 1652 colonial encounter and its unfolding, which are still protected today under the Black government, which is still anti-Black. In thinking along the lines of the texture of People's Being, I do not confine Black consciousness as a movement that started in 1968, but a movement that started in 1652 when the settler colonial conquest was inaugurated. And as such, if it were to be called anything else, I would call it into the framing of Cedric Robinson, the Black radical tradition, which is a tradition that existed even before the word could have been conceived. So that's how we should understand the texture of People's Being as that which deals with the long arc of this scandal. And it was unfortunate that in 2006, when Black people decided to gather and gossip about matters of their own, for them to talk about matters that are cognitive and somatic to them, which is to say, as they feel, think, and experience anti-Black racism, they were interdicted. They were interdicted by what I would call the liberal consensus, which was driven by white liberals and their Black attaches, who were the voice of reason in the post-1994 arrangement. By the very fact of their oppression as a collective, Blacks needed to mobilize as a collective to confront what dehumanizes them as a collective. They needed to share their collective lived experience that became the basis of their political and ontological formation. Hence the name, the Native Club came. That solidarity emerged in the form of a Native Club is what Mabokhomore identifies as a racial need, which is misconstrued as a racial threat by white liberals and their Black attaches. Without any fear of naming them, I will name Achille Mbembe and Jonathan Jansen. Well, they were there. The archives are there. They are the ones that were against the Native Club. And thanks, Professor Siepe, for taking Jonathan Jansen on in that Fair Lady debate, where they put your columns against each other in the form of an enfolio. Blacks were regarded as a racial threat because of they were threatening or destroying the reconciliatory project. What More shows is how Black solidarity is misconstrued, and often that as a silly and deliberate act, and it is not that which we should regard as ignorance. And it is a fact that Black solidarity is embedded in what Mabokhomore calls a racial response. Yeah. Blacks responded as blacks to the lived experience that serializes them as Black. It is not an automatic affair, and it is the effectivity of Blackness that leads to Black solidarity. With this, it is key then to understand Black solidarity as a necessity and thus being a justifiable mode of politics in challenging the liberal consensus, which was calling for the end of the Native Club. The texture of People's Being, I argue, should be understood in the realm of Black solidarity, and that being the justified critique of the Native Club against the liberal consensus. What is clear in More's thought and his philosophical defense, to be precise, and that of the texture of People's Being, is that the critical consciousness of Blacks cannot be silenced. Yeah. They claim that there is a new South Africa, while glossing over the existential misery of the majority of Blacks, shows the scandal of this polity. Critics of the Native Club, which I've mentioned, did not take it upon themselves to audit anti-blackness that is still pervasive. It is important to note that those who are not affected by anti-blackness still believe that it is not a matter deserving consideration.
Yeah.
Of course, they get affected, right, by anti-blackness, but of course they will not come out in public to admit, except when they are enraged, and then they want us to mobilize beyond them, right, because of they've been pushed outside of the master's table. Because I argue that there is no seat for the black native in the master's table.
Yeah.
You are sitting on a broken chair, a 3-legged or 2-legged chair, which is to say a chair, not at all, because you fall, you can't stand in that table. Maybe to ask, did the native club merely arise from a vacuum without any justification for its existence? Clearly, the answer is no. But what is the native club? In 2006, the liberal wrath descended upon blacks who could not defend themselves against the forces weighing on them. As a result, as it is best known, the native club was born to die. But I refuse in this complaint to say that the native club died, unless if we understand it as an event. But if you understand the native club as a scandal, it continues. On what is the native club? Ndlovu relays in terms of the origin to the then President Thabo Mbeki, and it was based on in the Africa Institute of South Africa in Pretoria. And this was to be the initiative post-1994, where blacks went on their way to be on their way. They went on their way to be on their way, so that they wanted to redefine themselves. Alas, they could not. Since the justification was that blacks do not have a right to meet on their own because they could not get what I would call the constitutional nod. And they could not be on their own. And the native club, which claimed to be advocating a robust sense of consciousness, was a welcome stance in terms of black solidarity, but this was what was to be interdicted by the liberal consensus. And it is unfortunate that it was the black attaché of the white liberal consensus who were forward in terms of condemning blacks. And as Maboko shows in his philosophical defense, the persistence of anti-black racism is a fact that still has to be contended with in terms of understanding knowledge in terms of black solidarity and engaging the existential matters that are facing blacks as a matter of necessity. And also to mark a very important side of standing that blacks cannot be complicit in their own suffering. This cannot be frowned upon as a danger to the liberal constitutional democracy. What is a danger? A grave one at that is liberal democracy itself, if it is underwritten by the hydraulics of the liberal consensus, if that it masks the structures and the infrastructure of racism and denies that the legacy of the settler colonial constitutionalist apartheid constitutional apparatus still endures even today, as it is marked by a reality of white power and privilege and its parasitic attendant that is called black dispossession. So in this complaint, I still insist that there is a need to return the dispossession, and that has been underwriting this polity, that there has to be the end of the dispossession of labor, land, and humanity. It is Biko who firmly knows, I quote, "We are in the position in which we are because of our skin," close quote. Biko defends black solidarity, a defense which for Moret emphasizes our understanding of the lived experience of being black, and the manner in which it is necessary for Blacks to show solidarity when they are at the cold face of anti-Black racism. People clearly ask, I quote, what we are collectively segregated against? What can be more logical than for us to respond as a group? Close quote. So we don't need any permission to congregate and discuss matters on our own. But it's unfortunate that, as we know, with the case of what followed 3 years after the Native Club, we had the Forum for Black Journalists, and we had the South African Human Rights Commission, which I called the Deputy Office of Solidarity, and also African Forum, because I argued that South African Human Rights Commission, without any fear of contradiction, that it's an office that is deputized to serve African Forum and Solidarity, which said in 2009 that it is unconstitutional for Black people to meet on their own, just because of Ebimakwe chased out a white journalist called Stephen Crotes. Jacob Zuma was there to address in the form of a press conference to talk to Black journalists, right? And as a result of that, there was a provocation that Andile Mutama did by writing a pamphlet. In fact, before it became a pamphlet, it was a paper that he delivered at the South African Human Rights Commission in Parktown in the front of the so-called civil society, this infrastructure of liberal consensus, where he delivered a paper called Blacks Can Be Racist. And I must confess that I was one of those people in my early journalism career who came out to his condemnation. And as a result of that stance, I got to be appointed as a columnist for Sowetan Online. But of course, I made a turn later after seeing that the liberal consensus does nothing but to choke. As we are still dealing with this very idea of we can't breathe. And Frans Fanon says, the reason that we resist is because of we can't breathe.
Yeah.
So I had to remove this chokehold hand of the liberal consensus from my fragile windpipes in order to breathe and to engage in what Frans Fanon would call combat breathing, which means the theft of air, like insisting to breathe even in the conditions of the chokehold. And in that result, I began to be committed and to change my way to say that I cannot be a journalist anymore. In finding their way to resist, Blacks have taken upon themselves not to be complicit in their own oppression. It is clear, as Biko says, that Black consciousness philosophy has to be understood on the basis of Blacks as a group. In no way that Steve Biko was busy with the idea of the individual is prior to society, everybody will be promoted on basis of meritocracy, there must be a minimal role of the state and so forth, and so forth, which are the very fallacies of the liberal doctrine. But Black consciousness, it was Black solidarity, it was Blacks coming together. And it was on that position that was to be a defining factor of their strength, as Steve Biko says. And Mabohomore follows in this tradition to say that Blacks were oppressed as a group and they had to respond as a group. So in this way, this was a matter of necessity. That is why the Native Club was not an accidental occurrence in history, but it was a scandal, that complaint that I'm willing to fight, that we have to continue in many other formations. And let me quote Maboko Pimore in extension. I quote, throughout the ages of struggle against racial oppression, Black identity and solidarity have been the favorite rallying call for social justice and liberation. Black leaders repeatedly exhorted Black people to become more unified collective agents for emancipation. Thus, many theorists in the history of Black political and social thought defended a collective identity theory that was tied up to liberatory Black solidarity, close quote. Maboko said this thought as a way of not only making a case for Black solidarity, but claiming that it inherently exists. But it was unfortunate that the South African Human Rights Commission, which is still suffering from the smoke of this liberal consensus, believes that it is unconscionable for Black people to meet on their own. And of course, it is underwritten by the hydraulics of the myth of the idea of the rainbow nation, and it attended discursive interventions that evade the race question, or even to claim in silly terms that racism has ended and it is time to move on, right? And so fundamentally entrenched is the view that the political project of those who do not want to go back to take South Africa forward. And as we know, which is something that is unfortunate, that the constitution of this country does not have 3 words. There are no 3 words in the constitution. There's no word called apartheid, there's no word called racism, and there's no word called slavery in the constitution. We don't have time, can just say Control F and look for those words. The constitution that is lauded as it only talks about the injustices of the past. But what is that past? What are those injustices if they are still continuing? And how do we respond even in the moments of the aftermath that what is happening in Marshalltown, it will just become a newspaper OJ, then we're gonna forget. So I have a complaint against this politics of amnesia that we need to be exorcised from. What white liberals and their Black attaches do not want to lose is their grip. They want to hold on tightly and to squeeze everything out of Blackness. And it is unfortunate that in this tight grip, the Black attaches will be squeezed too, or even crushed, right? Those who are saying, oh, we are with the liberals, blah, 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 they speak on our behalf. They know that their day is coming. I hope that Professor Jensen, wherever he is, he will mend his ways because they are coming for him. The wrath of white liberals unleashed against the Native Club should be understood on the basis of this logic of being squeezed and crushed to death. It is not only that there has been a complaint against the Native Club as racial exclusivity, but the subtext to this is that white liberals could not control what they viewed as their rightful and self-appointed duty of being paternal figures to Blacks who are perpetual children in their midst. Mora's body of work shows that it is not hard to detect white liberal hypocrisy when it comes to its attacks on Black solidarity. Since white liberals justify their presence in wanting to control Blacks, if Blacks go on their way, it means that white liberals will lose control over them. So they are the ones who are going to remind you, oh, what they're doing will lead you to destruction. Oh, the left question, look at Zimbabwe, right? So these are the things that they are there to guide you because you can't think for yourself. And when you speak, you must speak in the annals of what I will refer to as the deputized speech. And this is what the civil society, as it is called, and which we have seen recently that it has been nothing but a right-wing element as it has been shifting, even though it does not pronounce it, right? The white liberal consensus will not even condemn Helen Zille. It will keep quiet. When Blacks were called munchies by Penny Sparrow, the white liberals said, we are not like her. right? I have black friends, I have this, I have this. And then there were blacks who even joined the fray to say, oh, Penny Sparrow needs to be rehabilitated. And it is unfortunate that in this country, now in the recent history, if you are found to be talking black speech and also attacking the white liberal consensus, what can be misconstrued as hate speech, you will be howled before the South African Human Rights Commission. And the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation has made it its duty to be where you must be rehabilitated, right? Because of there is this thing that is being done. The issue of a presidential project and one that is elitist and that in terms of the native club is more fundamental to question. We cannot avoid this fact as Professor Siepe has shown in his work that those who were against Mbeki's intellectual project and politics were marked as pariah, right? And then there was this frustration, like there were those that were pushing for the native club to be the yes man and the yes woman for formulation, which is consonant with the Thabo Mbeki's project, that the native club was supposed to be a formation of just a bunch of agrees to the presidential project. But we are glad that there is a record of those who are contesting such a formation, and it shows that it could have been a melting pot or the site of contestations of different ideas. And this reason is what led to the formation of the Native Club as the very thing that was contested, but it was the inner debate, it was amongst blacks, like, so we didn't need whites to tell us that, oh, but this is Mbeki's project, blah, blah, as Ronald Suresh Roberts was hesitant to explain what the Native Club is. Like, we needed that intramural debate, we needed to be our own, right? In Sesotho we say, like, that this is a family matter, like it is within. We don't need you to tell us that this is Thabo Mbeki's project and so forth. Beware of the mob mentality. Unfortunately, critics of the Native Club called for its demise without basing such calls on the reasons why the Native Club came into existence in the first place. Something that remains scandalous is the critics' silence on the question of anti-Black racism. What gains currently in the discourse and chorus against Native Club, which is led by the Black attaches, Ala Achille Mbembe and Jonathan Elson, is that the question was that of reverse racism. Right? And we know like how that was mobilized as the weapon, and then it came to, oh, I was born here, who's the native, who's the settler, right? And white liberals were claiming to be victims of racism. And it is said that de Klerk wrote a piece in that era as well, like claiming that he's African and so forth. Nowhere did the Native Club justify the exclusion of whites as an act of racism. To deny that, in fact, South Africa is plagued by anti-Black racism, and we know that the Native Club was a matter of necessity. So Mabokhomora is correct in noting, I quote, the emergence of the organization do not promote the empowerment of Blacks through self-organization. The creation of safe spaces, please underline that, safe spaces where Blacks could share and analyze their experiences, voice their grievances and anger, and develop new and better institutional practices, which became a source of surprise and discomfort to many people in the post-apartheid New South Africa, close quote.
Yeah.
Mullen is correct to argue that the discourse of individual liberalism denies the lived reality of groups. Everything is reduced to the white liberal as the individual, and there's no way that this can materialize into the collective being, more fundamentally that of the black, because the devil, we are oppressed as a group. You know, even like when you are individual, you represent a group, right? You sit with whites there in that table with your three-legged chair. What do you think about Jacob Zuma? You're the one like who's liable. What do you think of Ramaphosa, right? Mona is correct to argue that the discourse of the individual liberalism in denying this lived reality is what Steve Biko's black consciousness has been pushing against. And Steve Biko has been in his emphasis of the formulation, articulation, constitution, and expression of black solidarity under the auspices of black consciousness, submitting what underpins the critique of the white liberal subject and its politics. And also this politics having to be marked by power, like this power meaning power over blacks. Mm-hmm. Even if the white liberal subject could propagate the plight of the black, this is just rhetoric in that the status quo will not change. Yeah. And efforts will be made to censor all modes of black critique, and black consciousness being one of that case. So there is nothing genuine in wanting to take the position of acting on behalf of blacks. The collective constitution that Steve Biko espouses is the antithesis of the colonial consciousness of what the liberal subject is. Black solidarity stands in firm opposition of anti-blackness, as Maboko More shows, and this is what is a principled line of reasoning, where what is key is the fact that black solidarity is not accidental. It is not formed on the basis of free but will, it's not on the basis of free will, but on the basis of necessity. For everything that is at stake for blacks and black being is encompassed by the black lived collective experience. It is, as Maboko More notes, I quote, imposed from the outside by some sort of foreign and existential power and result of common alienation, close quote. The lived experience that affects blacks as a collective will, by any means, make the politics of their black bodily being become one of solidarity. You're not marked by your, I don't see race, I'm conscious, does not apply to, no, you are marked. Like you are carrying that race, like you are a man. When they see you as a group, like it's not that oh, I'm an individual, I don't see race, I'm exceptional. Like, and please, I have a complaint again. As we are doing this project, as you said, Madam Vice Chancellor, there's going to be a pushback. Yeah. Like, and in this complaint, I'm saying that we should stop wanting to be palatable to the sensibilities of the liberal consensus. We should even fear to being appointees of black exceptionalism. Like, oh, you're a better black, come to our table. Please, when Professor Jonathan Jensen comes back, we must embrace him, but he must also be exorcised. The reaction that the Native Club received from the liberal wrath, with its political correctness undergirded by anti-blackness, is indicative of the fact that blacks were not allowed to think for themselves. The fear that haunts white liberals is that they will no longer be having what Steve Biko would call perpetual under-16s, like who are in need of white paternalism. Despite the numerous reasons against the success of the Native Club, there seems to be no reflection on the activities that are still continuing in white racist formations, which have even paramilitary bases everywhere, where we still live in a country where farms are gulags, where we live in a country where black mine workers, they were killed without any form of accounting, and then we just had a theatric affair in the form of a Falam commission. And where also we are living in that amnesia of not linking this long arc of tragedy from 1652. We don't need the Falam Commission, we need the Jan van Riebeck Commission of Inquiry that starts from 1652 to account and audit the crimes that have been done to Black humanity. If the Native Club was intended for Blacks, it means that Blacks wanted to discuss and engage around matters of their concern. And indeed, these are Blacks who should be on their own. They must have witnessed, they must have wished to forge solidarity which will enable them to work out ways of self-creation in their own terms. It's one thing to be in a debate and so forth and to be given a platform, but there is another to have your own terms.
Yeah.
And this is how we should understand even the long history of Black consciousness. And I don't see why is it a crime not to have even political formations like Black Land First, whereas like we have AfriForum. Not say that they are comparable. They are not comparable, but you know, because today we know how the AfriForum is embracing the Constitution, right? So the critique of the Constitution is what we need. Hence those three words, right? Apartheid, racism, and slavery, which we will not fight. And we should as well get out of this constitutional spell because it is now weaponized to make Black agency impotent or criminal. And we know also that when AfriForum and Solidarity and other racist formations use the Constitution, that becomes what like it becomes a powerful tool through which the judiciary can rally around. Right? You know? So thanks, Professor Sepe, for the conversation we had about the precedent of the law and the soul. That as a jurist, you must tap into your soul as opposed to the prescripts that are there. And this also links to what Madam Vice Chancellor, like you said. I'm glad that you spoke from the soul, and I hope that you are going to bend these policies to make the reality possible. Land, peace, and bread, I thank you.
There are times when most of us act and we don't reflect on our actions. And I say this as somebody who was an active participant in a Native Club. And you are correct that it was born and earmarked to die. And it's the irony of it is that it died the same day it was conceived, practically. And not that it's something of pride, but I could say that in the annals of history, I was the Secretary General of the Native Club. I was appointed despite what some people had hoped for. But as Professor Chancellor said, we've been engaged in those debates. And I hear it was also reminding me of some of the things that I had written that I was saying to him that I now can't access my own writing because I've got to pay for what I wrote. So this is why it becomes very important that our works, we must actually own the publication house so that we protect those ideas. Now imagine that I've got to pay for my own work and I can't access it. So that is but I thought what you also gave us is to remind us that, as you put it, that Black solidarity, it was not something that came accidentally. It was born out of necessity. But also the contradictions between what is called the constitutional order and the continued anti-blackness that is pervasive. And also to link that to the project, the international project of making the political, pedagogical, and the pedagogical more political. With that, I would like to call Dr. Akume as a respondent. And I see that there are already comments that are reflecting on the presentation. But over to you, sir.
Thank you, Speaker. Let me start there. I see you, Vice Chancellor.
I know.
But if he had not been here, this would not have been adjusted to accommodate my height. So thank you very much. The Vice Chancellor, Deputy Vice Chancellors, Deans, the Chairman of the event, our guest speaker, I greet you. All protocols observed. This was a very spirited and very powerful presentation. That's taken me by surprise. I will follow the Vice Chancellor's advice. She said something I think was quite profound in an introduction when she says, be naked, be willing to be vulnerable in this process. Be willing to show what you know, what you do not know. Be willing to be corrected. I didn't know about Maboho More until I was asked to respond to this. And I said, Prof. Siepe will never stop putting us in trouble. They will get us to do things that we have to try to do. And of course, I knew Biko. But thank you very much, Speaker. That was very powerful. Professor Sitole has raised certain things. At a point, I thought that he was going to offer a defense of Black solidarity. And I was saying, oh, not again. I thought it was going to be apologetic. That Black people gather, you have to understand, we don't hate white people, we are not racist.
Yeah.
I thought he was going to deliver that, but he didn't. Instead of being apologetic, he made a complaint. And he used that word more than 10 times. And I want to thank you because this is something that we have discussed, I and Professor Ndlovu. We've also discussed with Prof. Siepe and the Vice Chancellor sometimes. What we found very disturbing when people who, it's like that all lives matter repost. People are talking about Black people being killed and somebody says, but all lives matter. Like, show me the last time a white person had a knee on his neck.
Yeah. Sure.
So, and then people are saying, oh, that Black lives matter. You say, no, it should be all lives. And we had an engagement recently, someone I mentioned to the Vice Chancellor earlier, and they were talking about affirmative action. We are talking about epistemologies. And several colleagues at UNISWL as well, and some colleagues not from UNISWL. And they were saying affirmative action, when you affirm one group, you by the same token automatically disaffirm other groups. Then I challenged the facilitator, whose name I will choose to keep, not because I don't want you to know him. I don't think some names are not worth knowing. So that's the reason it's not I'm scared of mentioning the name, whose name I won't mention. So when you affirm a group, I said, but why don't you tell us the history? How affirmative action came about? Because we are talking about different kinds of epistemologies. And he deliberately did not reveal the history of colonial epistemologies. And that's what you mentioned, Prof. Sitole, when you talked about how the liberal consensus, I can only respond to some parts of your presentation, please, where you say the liberal consensus masks the ongoing racialization of Black people. There is, and this is what, sorry, we'll keep talking about Kachi because he was here with us. So do not feel bad that we're not measuring you with him. Yeah,
He was my supervisor.
aha, he's very tall. You're even taller than him.
Supervisor.
Very good, fantastic. This is what Prof. Gacheni was talking about. Colonial knowledges as knowledges of secrecy, knowledges that hide.
Yeah.
There is a deliberate attempt to dehistoricize any Black philosophical tradition, to make it appear as something that somebody woke up in the morning and talked about. So it's that same pattern, how the liberal consensus, not just in South Africa, but practically all over the world, hides, deliberately keeps secret the history of its operations and the history of resistance to its operations. When I became introduced to decolonial thought, I challenged my colleagues from political science, especially the professors. I said, how in the world did you teach us? We grew up learning about the US as a paragon of democracy. How can the US be a democratic country, given its history of brutal racism against its own minorities? How do we end up having textbooks that teach the US? And then we even have many Africans who want to copy the US in terms of democracy. How? But it all functions, as you say, how the liberal consensus, both in the production of knowledge and in political life, skillfully hides its operations. And I found that to be a very powerful proposition from you. But what I find the most powerful is what I said at the beginning, how you have turned what could have become an apology, because there are very many Black scholars, very many decolonial, postcolonial scholars who apologize. They begin by, oh no, you see this thing, it's not that we hate white people. No, it's not that we want Black people to dominate white people. We're just trying to, how completely unnecessary, I think you programmed for us, how completely unnecessary, although you use the word of Maboko More, but I think you put it so strongly in your own words. And another thing you bring up is the issue of history. In your repeated reference to the new South Africa. It's something that I engaged also in my PhD. I looked at the work of one of the works of Ahmad Dango. I come from a literary studies perspective, and where he challenges in that novel what is really new. And scholars who focus on temporality have made us aware of how, especially dominant Eurocentric forms of historicization are contrived, again, as part of the hiding mechanism to confer, to keep what is real, what is present, and label it with a tape that says past. It is still there, but they put it in a box and call it past so that you cannot refer to them as things that are still current. And you made that repeatedly when you spoke of the continued anti-Black racism that describes life in South Africa, that describes life in the global world. Another thing I find very, very informative, very, very profound in your postulations is when you repeatedly say Black people are oppressed as a group. And I know you are invoking Moray, but I see your words also in what you are doing. And what it's lodged in my mind is the fact that Black people are oppressed as a group, by a group. I mean, the liberal consensus operates as a group. That's why there is consensus. I actually call them hyenas. They hunt as hyenas. That's what NATO is about. That's how they hunt. If you say something in the press, the entire liberal press comes against you as if they didn't hear. It's as if, oh, how could he say this? One newspaper, the other media outlets, the other academy, they all come against you. How hypocritical it is for people who operate in that way to try to undermine people who try to organize as a group. It's extremely critical, but I think your work foregrounds it very, very powerfully. I think the last thing I would like to make a little reference to is the idea of the two things I'd like to make reference to is what you say about the persistence, and I think we said that earlier, so let me move away from that. Let's talk about the You talk about the myth of the Rainbow Nation, and you talk very powerfully about how words such as apartheid, racism, and slavery do not exist in the so-called celebrated South African Constitution. Any surprise that de Klerk only recently discovered that apartheid was a crime against humanity? I don't think it's a surprise, because that was not engaged. That was labeled as something that was passed, and not something to be engaged. But then again, I find very powerful what you say about your own turning and how you were about to be conscripted, and your references to the Black attaches. As a non-South African, it's something that we experience a lot. You come into some of these meetings and you are, how do you see this? Yes. There's always that attempt to you see, but you are better. You see, there's always that attempt to make you feel better by showing that your fellow Blacks are inferior, that you're superior to your fellow Blacks. It's a very interesting thing that's happening, and it's one of the major forms of the pushback that we get against the decolonial law. This person I was talking about was talking about decolonization and talking about Africanization, and described Africanization in terms of racism. Exactly what you said about the native club being branded as racist. Is it not such an irony that the very inventors of global racism would accuse any people on earth of being racist? Because the system of using skin pigmentation through forms of power to segregate, to dehumanize people is a Eurocentric system. So for those who subscribe to Eurocentrism, to now use it to attack people who seek to respond to that system is very interesting. There was this interview that Chimamanda Adichie was with some big white guy in the US a few years ago, I think 4 or so years ago. And then he was trying to lecture her about racism. Then she turned and said, no, you cannot define racism. Yeah. Let those who have suffered from racism tell you what racism is. You are not in a place, you do not have the position to define racism. I will end by saying that I really find powerful, beginning from the Vice Chancellor's opening. And the Vice Chancellor, I know I was asked to respond to the speaker directly, but there's a thread running through your opening and the chairman's introductions and the speaker's presentation, which I think is very important to mention. We can see the spiritedness of the speaker. We can see that he's speaking from the soul. And that's what I was telling you when Professor Kacheni was here. Yeah. There's a way you led those conversations that is more than mere facilitation. Yes. There was a conscientization element that is very powerful. And for the Vice Chancellor to undertake to study, and for the chair to undertake to study, to take these things into the soul, is why Professor Epe says we must consider this as academics in this institution as directives for implementation. It shows a heightened level, in my view, of scholarship, which many of the naysayers condemn, because they now go about saying that, oh, decolonization is more of ideology but there has never been a point. I think this presentation has shown that there has never been a point where scholarship is not ideology. Yeah. The question is, what kind of ideology does a particular scholarship propose? What are the effects in terms of people's real lived experience of the ideology proposed by certain kinds of scholarship? So the questions we should be asking ourselves as people involved in decolonization is what ideologies we should be able to defend. The ideologies. I do not shrink from that. I say, yes, decolonization is ideological. Every form of scholarship is ideological. But if you tell me the ideologies of the kind of scholarship that you subscribe to, I will tell you the ideology of the kind of scholarship that you subscribe to. And I will leave the podium by thanking again the speaker, that we do need, my close friend, Professor Morgan Olu, freed me from the pressure of trying to disagree with the speaker you are responding to. In his response to Prof. Bewaji, he said, I'm struggling to disagree with you. He said, but maybe it's because we've been trained in a scholastic tradition that we must respond adversarially, even if we do not find anything. There. So that gave me the baptism of freedom. And I am very free to agree with the presenter whose ideas cohere with the ideas, my understanding of the world and the ideas of the intellectual mission that I'm engaged in. So we would like to hear from the colleagues, and I would like you to take up, if possible, what the implications are for our conception of history.
Yeah.
The implication of describing a situation that carries the very features of the so-called past. So how did we come about the idea of the new? And how might we respond, especially for people who teach? How might we respond? How might we do this in our pedagogies and in the curriculum to show that what is past is actually not necessarily past? To show that historicization itself is a political process, an intensely political process. And how might Black scholarship, Black scholars, or decolonial scholars respond to the perpetual attempt of the naysayers to brand what they do as racist? In what ways would you recommend? What directions can you point us to? Because that's one thing I believe many of our colleagues in the university are struggling when we talk about, so, oh, but are you not fighting the white people? Oh, but is this not racism? Oh, are we going to withdraw from the world? When no decolonial scholar ever said that, because there is no decolonial scholar that has said, now we are going to decolonize, what we are going to do, we are going to stop using cell phones. But then when you come to a seminar and a workshop, they say, okay, are you going to stop using cell phones? Did I ever tell you I wanted to stop using cell phones? So that desire to be apologetic, that impulse to be apologetic. Now, I think I remember the final thing I wanted to say. You said something about perpetual tutelage. That's not your word. I saw a seminar taking place at one of the big universities in Gauteng, and somebody was coming all the way, either by Zoom or in person, from the global north to teach postgraduate students about something very trivial. I think it's how to write an essay. I say, will it ever happen that you be the excellent researcher that you are? Will it ever happen that you will be asked to go and teach students at, even ECSU, will you be asked to go and teach students at Oxford University, such trivial things? How did Black scholars and Black universities come to the point that we easily submit to be the perpetual students of those who are assumed to be our perpetual teachers? I thank you.
Dr. Akbume, thank you very much for your always being able to capture the essence of the speakers. And I have a number of comments here, and some of them are questions. The first question, which is put here, is it possible to attain Black exceptionalism and defeat susceptibility to a liberal consensus, which to me is tantamount to colonial incarceration, and without decolonizing the mind? I mean, that's the first question that I see here. And let's see. Of course, Professor Kacheni has already responded to that, but his answer is quickly to say, of course. And so I'm not going to deal with that. And then the other one said, anti-Blackness should openly be challenged by academics and in the curriculum. This will involve Black solidarity. This will address the scandal of the Native Club as a decolonial project. And the other one says the Black people are oppressed as a group and they should respond as a group. Profound. Racial need deliberately misconstrued as a racial threat. So those are, so it is just one question that asks, is it possible to attain Black exceptionalism and defeat susceptibility to liberal consensus, which the author says is tantamount to colonial incarceration. So I would not try to say anything but to ask you to just pick up both the comments and also something that was triggered, as you said there, and then we'll take it from there.
Can I say something?
Yeah, I think you should say it. Yeah.
I think I'm moved by the notion that racism, the approach of racism was more like to the group. But I want to talk about, or you to talk about, the pressure or the oppression that we suffer today. Why are people uncertain whether this is racism or not? And I think it's the approach of individualism, where you are put in a corner and you are boxed by racists, and you are made to feel you are alone. Because I've struggled to come to terms with what made the movement against racism so powerful in the past. Was that it was, I struggled to agree with my colleagues in psychology that want to claim that racism is no more, it's no more, you can't see it, it's like it's hidden, it's now softer. I said, it depends on who receives it. The impact of receiving racism, even as an individual, does not warrant that racism is no more pervasive, and or it still violates my soul. But the problem I have, or that I think my people have, is to understand it as such, because now it's so made uncertain. You're not sure whether am I overreacting to this thing? Am I overthinking it? Is it okay? Is it? So I really want us to dig into that and say, what is it that the racism or perpetually rape us as Black people and in corners and as individuals that has made people to change it and say, I once attended a conference where I felt like I'm alone here, because I was saying the fact that people want to claim that racism is no more evasive. I said it depends on which side you are on. If you are a recipient of racist punches, you still feel it the same way you feel it as a group way back in the 60s, where we were saying this thing is blatant. And we want to claim now as Black people that it's no more blatant, but it's more subtle. There's no rubbish subtle racism yet. Racism is a violation of the soul, whether you are a group or you are even elevated from what you were saying, Prof, that you were saying you can be elevated, which I call you are being invited into this, and you put it in a pedestal to say you are a clean Black, you speak beautiful English, you're better than them. And then that's how you get invited into a racist tendencies. And as a Black person, you feel like you're a better Black now because someone has confirmed that you are a better Black. So my thinking says that I don't want us to leave this room believing that, yes, in terms of struggle, we still the group, because all of us are labeled with one thing. When my boss doesn't believe that I'm good Black that day, I can be demoted to join other Blacks. Right. But at no point we should ever think that the questions on racism and the tendencies of racism, the ghost of racism, will ever leave if we don't confront it as something that is pervasive, as something that is still hitting us in terms of experience the same way it was hitting us when we were a mob.
Right.
Because now what it does, you are in a corner, you are boxed in that corner by racists, and then you ask yourself, am I overreacting?
Yeah.
And you are apologetic because you think, no, I'm too sensitive.
Yeah.
You are told, you are too sensitive. That was not, because there's no racism anymore. And for us, what I like about your talk is your complaint that for us to want to rush to the other side, that we are now liberated. Oh, this is a new South Africa. What's new about this South Africa? Where is the land? If it's new, I think
Thanks very much. The thing that I am very appreciative of Dr. Akome is that we should understand in the light of your whole response the issue of a false gift as part of a will say.
Yeah.
I'm giving you something only to dispossess you.
Yeah.
And this is like what we have been chained in, that in the post-1994, as Frans Fanon will say, as Maboko More himself extends, we are celebrating flag freedoms, or flag independence. And it's so sad that when this euphoria happens, there is the muting or the elimination of memory. And we have been implanted with this device that is powerful more than this AI technology that we have, that we are induced in the spirit of forgetting. Right? We're only going to remember people like, see t-shirts, blah, blah, blah. And whereas that is a capitalist project, like, buy Pico is ubiquitous here. And this false generosity that we've been given in South Africa, I will mention 3 things. The ideology, we've been given liberal democracy, right? And it's so fun how whiteness inserts itself. It says our hard-won freedoms, our hard-won freedoms. Ooh, oh, they were at the receiving end of, my uncle was there, or I was there in the anti-apartheid struggle, blah, 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 no, I made sure. But we knew that some will go to Houghton, some will go to Soweto, some will not have their house kicked by, their doors kicked and invaded by the police. They'll just enter and do as they please. And we have to understand this very idea of false generosity as it writes itself, like this white master liberal narrative that existed. We're not denying that they will know it, but it's not our duty to be bound to, I did this for you, right? Because one thing that I like about white liberals is that they keep receipts. They remind you, remember you were hungry, I housed you, remember this, and then even if you read memoirs, you find this liberal personalism outplaying itself, and you're like, I got you, like when I read with that suspicion that, there you go again, and we know even the tragedy of Ernest Cole, the photographer who exposed the atrocities of apartheid, the famous photo in this that one of black miners who were lying on the door being examined. He has this interesting book called House of Bondage, and how there was one white figure who refused to give the family the photographs, and then she said no. She dictated how the estate should be dispersed and used. So this false generosity is what we have to critique today. And also in this false gift we're given, the gift of the ideology, liberal democracy, and then also we're given the gift of the national anthem. Right? We are singing this term so proudly. A deep love, and I won't continue due to the respect for my fallen ancestors. Like, you know, we sing it proudly, and then when we go back to it, it's a defense of this long history of settler colonialism that I have explained. And then what we did was just to make sure that as if the anthem was cobbled together, we sing it very proudly, right? And then we also have another false gift when we have serious existential laments like Senzenina, like which were sung by the Cape Town all white and just few sprinkles of black choir members singing Senzenina, and then they forgot certain choruses, right? Deliberately, right? And then it was just Senzenina, Sohlangana Ezulwini, which is a lie. Like, you know, we know like what is the actual composition. So that is the first gift that we've even been given with the national anthem, which I will argue originally that the two stems, which are Afrikaans and English, they are about the land. Yeah. To us, like it's about Nkosikelela, where whites are mumbling. But then when we get into those two last verses, it's about the real question. It is them like who now stand proudly, like, you know, and then we participate, and then we relate. That is why, like, I've made a vow to not to sing it, not as a way of being dishonoring the state, but honoring the ancestors. That I am for the old version of Wozamoya. And then also the flag. We have the most ugliest flag. The South African flag. We know that the TEC, Transitional Executive Council, when this flag was made, it has the colors of the ANC and the colors of the Prudepont. Yeah. Examine the flag of this country. The flag of this country has the colors of the ANC and the Prudepont. That runs parallel with this term. So there is this bastardization of memory. And then look who was commissioned to do this flag. Look at the debates that were muted, the minutes that you will not find in those transition executive council meetings about the issue of the flag, the issue of the anthem. So this first gift that I want to highlight, it is this violent act of bastardization of memory, right? And we must admit that we are in a big psychiatric world. Yeah. We are being lobotomized. Let's start there. We are being lobotomized. So the struggle is the one of coming back to ourselves, right? And the likes of Ngugi wa Thiong'o decolonizing the mind, the whole trajectory of the resist struggle in various forms, not in terms of books only, but in the very same stories that Professor Siepe, you explained in terms of thinking about Hinza, Skukune, and so forth, when various figures heard about those stories and then how they were crystallized. So we need to crystallize, and then we need also to experiment. And then this is where I will not become so obsessed about the issue of Black exceptionalism. We know how flawed the very idea of exceptionalism is. Like, we know what happened. Mahmoud Mamdani even critiqued it, like, oh, South Africa, we are exceptional, we have this, we are unlike other African countries, or it still plays to that very idea of I'm a better player. Yeah. Like, you know, so that's what I will not entertain, but except to amplify one important point that we have to go into the workshop of memory. Yeah. If we are in this psychiatric ward, we don't need that medication. we need to do those mad diaries, right? Where we write those diaries and then we take even things that were taken for granted as a way of having to remember and to restore. And in that act, we are able also as well to think in ways that are even going to scare us, right? We have to be scared, because if you are comfortable, it means that we are not getting into the very process of healing. Like, so this is not the healing of the TRC, which was nothing but a performance, like, but this true healing of getting back to ourselves, as Stepiko would say. And the issue as well, it is to also to stretch our tongues.
Yeah.
Our tongues have to be stretched. We can no longer have interdicted tongues, right? Our tongues have been interdicted in a sense that there are things that we cannot say. Like, we know that now that we have the weapon of hate speech. Yeah, that's the interdiction of the tongue. So we need now to stretch our tongues and to speak in two terms, right? One, it is aglosia, which is the loss of language, right? Where like the loss of words, where like we should not fear to speak that which can dissolve into meaninglessness, right? We need aglosia, right? We shouldn't fear to say the unsayable. And number two, we need glossolalia as well. We must be able to speak in tongues, right? Of course, people understand it in a theological argument only, but it is not. It is when we are able to speak as many sides of blackness, speaking in these various different sides of pockets where we are being compartmentalized, deliberately just to make us confused, right? And in those two forms of glossolalia and aglosia, we will be able to fashion the Black existential speech, right? Which is decolonial in intent and purposes, right? It's a language that does not seek to be legible to the liberal consensus. That's where the problem lies. We want to say the right things. Frantz Fanon said something beautiful, like, that I fought for justice, liberty, and equality. And then I realized that I was fighting for white justice, white liberty, white equality, and then he says that the Black was acted upon. So we need to break away from this very idea of being acted upon, because if you're acted upon, you're not free, right? So 1994, it was the era of emancipation, right? But it was not the era of liberation. How do I distinguish the two? Because it might seem as if it's a semantic game. I'm confused. Emancipation is a freedom that the master gives you, right? It's a personal seat. He says, now you are free. Like it's what de Klerk said to Nelson Mandela. Now you are free, while creating another jail for him elsewhere. Right? So we need now our own liberation, and this liberation will not come in the defense of the Constitution, will not come into the idea of the Rainbow Nation, will not come in the idea of Blacks having to apologize to whites or expecting whites to atone, and then whites don't pass. It's not about that, but it's also how to rethink and also unthink, as Salvador Nkajeni would say, how to unthink as well in order to do the very act of rethinking. So we need that very basis of not being able to be gaslighted, Madam Vice Chancellor. That's what it's like you are the one who is mad, right? And then you'll be told that you must attend the racial distinct classes and so forth, or racism is just a quirk of the mind, it's an act of stupidity. No, let's go back to Steve Biko. It's simple. Racism is power. Even Steve Biko said it even before. It is power. as you know, what happened to the Native Club? It was because Black people were creating the institutions that are going to support their existence.
Yeah.
Even today, Black people don't have institutions that support them, right? They don't have, like, at all, because if they come into being, they'll be declared as unconstitutional.
Yeah.
So what should we do then? My belief is this: we have to insist. We must refuse to be like wanting to explain ourselves, because of when you explain yourself, you'll be gaslighted. And challenging anti-Blackness is not engaging in a debate with, like, those who are oppressing you. They will make you mad, like, and we must continue to complain. It's our pain, right? We are at the receiving end of this pain. But get over yourself. You must move on. Like, you are blinded by, like, we see these things even in peer review reports, like, this vile epistemic racism that exists. But we have to continue because of there is a condition that still exists, and it is upon us to address it without having to beg for those who are dispossessing us to give us something back. We must take it. That's what liberation is.
Thank you very much for that quick response. And also to just round up before I call the Professor Brown to do the honor of closing, is just to remind ourselves that the fundamental thrust of the presentation today that focuses on BICO was about the shifting the geography of reason.
Yeah.
That Africans can think, which the whole idea of the epistemic violence was targeted to say they are unthinking. Then in the last, in the response, the Vice Chancellor was raising the issue of when sometimes you find yourself in a situation of doubt and you have to deal with that. And part of it is really what we are taught to start doubting that which we know to be true. So the notion of confidence is what we we are reclaiming. And the last comment was really to understand the master's tools will not dismantle the master's house. So if we are going to use the tools that are given to you by the master, you can rest assured that you'll never win. Even in scholarship, the whole idea of being peer reviewed, you must ask who is doing the peer review. And also you must, and they always know that if they have to choose Black people, they choose their Blacks carefully. They never make a mistake. So in the same way that Africans were very clear during the time of slavery that you have the house Negroes and you have the field Negroes. And their attitude was always the same, different. If the house master was on fire, the house Negro will be trying to get water to deal with it. But the field Negro will play for more wind. So that attitude is very different. So we must always never lose sight for that. And then the last point is that is what Malcolm X put nicely, that being in front of somebody's bus, or in the middle of somebody's bus, or at the back, does not dignify you until you have your own bus. So what this calls for is also that we must actually call for and establish institutions and processes and systems that affirm Africans, and without apology. We have spent too much time apologizing and it has not worked. Professor Stoddem, I have a paper that I know you're going to invite me to deliver on the why the post-1994 democratic experiment has not worked. And it will be more 7 or 8 reasons why it has failed. And it will be clear that it failed at the moment of conception.
Yeah.
And with that, may I call Professor Brown to close the session and to thank also the VC for the most profound, but I hope that it is seen as a directive to the academic project in this university.
Thank you very much, Professor Sepe. Good afternoon, everybody. Allow me, Professor Sepe, to begin by saying respectfully that all protocol is observed so that I can get straight into the task of closing. And I have with me here a couple of notes that I'm going to pick on as I acknowledge Prof. Setole and the VC. Ladies and gentlemen, you would agree with me that this public lecture the public lecture given today was a great success. And Professor Stolle, the success of this event is a continuation of a series of success that we have been putting together over the last couple of months, perhaps year, leading by the team leading the university's effort to decolonize. And we are trying to decolonize all aspects of the core business, its culture and practices across the university. The public lecture you have given today was a success for me for 3 reasons. First, for choreographing Biko's life and experience in a manner that brought the whole perspective of Biko to life. Your message says to us as a university, we cannot make great progress with decolonizing without first coming to grips with Stephen Biko's work on Black consciousness. And I know the Vice Chancellor is a student of Biko. Her thesis grappled with Biko as she tried to understand the coconut. See, I do remember. So I'm going to break protocol by thanking you first, Professor Setole, for this great insights that you've put before us and adding to our understanding of decolonization, the native club, amidst liberal consensus. And I actually asked a question about how do we dismantle this issue of the black attaché.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that is an important question, and I think really you have choreographed the whole thing very well for us today, and I think we have to thank you profoundly for that. Mabopo More, as an important student of Biko and the work that he did, really set the foundation and tell us where to go in that regard. So I break protocol, VC, by acknowledging Professor Setole first. My second reason for why the event was a success is the coherence in the message. And here I am taking into account the past seminars and public lectures that we have had on the theme of decolonization. To do this requires leadership, and the VC's leadership has been unwavering in this respect. And at this point, VC, this is where I bring you in. Your message in opening, and I'm going to draw on a couple of things, painted the picture so well by juxtaposing universalism and particularism, which set the tone very well for understanding the native club. and how it sits very well into exclusionism. That pillar was an important foundation in laying out the pathway for the public lecture that we have just received. So thank you for your leadership. Thank you for the excellent perspective that you've put out and the concepts that were so very clear in your introductory remarks. And I think that you deserve a round of applause. Professor Sepe, my third reason for saying that this was indeed a successful lecture is that the event is growing in terms of participation. And I kept checking at the back there on how many people we have logging in today. We counted on the virtual space up to 60, or probably more than 60. And when you consider this number with the number we had when we were doing Professor Gacheni in terms of that week workshop, you really see that there's growing engagement. And these are signs that more and more members of the university community are engaging and buying into the project to decolonize. Today, I commend your efforts and really applaud you and your team for pushing this agenda. So in addition to your role of steering us in the direction that you have in leading the program today, we also really want to commend you for driving the university to participate in this project. So thank you very much for your work. We see there are a number of other members who contributed to making this public lecture a success. And I just want to touch on a couple of others. First of all, our audience. We saw the number of comments coming through. Our virtual audience, we commend you for staying with us the whole time, and your commitment to learning and engaging and transforming is really applauded. And I thank you for that. Our physical audience, thank you very much for engaging with Professor Tole in the way that you have done. Dr. Akpome, what can we say about him? The consummate responder. Your response was as enlightening and stimulating as it was challenging. And I think you captured the essence of the message very well. And we thank you for that elaboration that you put out. To the organizing committee, the support team, ICT, the Vice Chancellor's office, CMD, thank you for giving us exceptional service. Let me also thank our DVCs, Professor Kunene, I have to call my boss first. Professor Namlomo, for guiding the academic team on this journey on the ground. Thanks to our dean for steering the faculty to transform and giving time to participate in this event. Professor Tombela, who is not with us here physically, but perhaps online, Professor Lestoena, Professor Berlin, and Professor Shukani. Thank you very much. Keep up the hard work. With this point, ladies and gentlemen, I want to conclude and to say the event is now closed. Thank you very much. Have a good night. Yes, it's not a usual.
Yeah, but it starts with the identification.
Yeah.
Once you identify a problem,
The most